A small-town courtroom became the unlikely stage for an extraordinary transformation. It all started with a police officer known for his biased behavior and sharp words, targeting those he was meant to protect. His attitude caught the attention of a judge who refused to let injustice slip by unnoticed. Their first encounter was tense, an explosive clash of authority and prejudice. But what happened next took everyone by surprise. This officer, once a symbol of division, would go on to become an unexpected advocate for change, challenging his own past and standing up for the very community he once overlooked. What could have driven this shift? And how did this judge inspire someone to confront their own prejudice so boldly? Stay tuned as we unravel this powerful story of redemption, courage, and the fight for equality, a journey that proves even the harshest critics can become the loudest champions for justice. Officer Daniels was known around town for his sharp tongue and heavy-handed approach. To many in the Black community, he was more than just a cop. He was a symbol of the deep-seated prejudice they had fought against for years. Daniels didn't shy away from his reputation. If anything, he wore it like a badge of pride. But when he crossed paths with Judge Ellis, everything began to change. Judge Ellis was a man of principle, a firm believer in justice and equality. He had seen enough discrimination in his courtroom to recognize it in an instant, and he wasn't afraid to call it out. When Daniels brought a case filled with questionable motives to the stand, Ellis didn't just dismiss it. He confronted the officer directly, challenging his actions and exposing the bias in his approach. But what no one knew then was that this confrontation would ignite something unexpected in Daniels, something no one, not even the judge, could predict. Daniels couldn't shake the judge's words that day. They echoed in his mind, louder than the sirens he'd grown so used to. At first, he dismissed it as another clash of authority, just a judge overstepping his bounds. But something about the way Judge Ellis looked at him, with equal parts frustration and disappointment, made him pause. Daniels had spent years in control, enforcing the rules as he saw fit. But for the first time, he began to wonder if those rules had been fair at all. Meanwhile, in the community, stories of Daniels' encounter with Ellis began to spread. Some saw it as just another example of the system calling out its own, a moment that would fade without real change. But others noticed small, strange shifts in Daniels' behavior. He started asking questions he'd never cared to before, lingering at local gatherings where he once would have only stopped to break things up. Still, not everyone believed his intentions. Suspicion ran deep, and many wondered if his curiosity was genuine or just another angle. The tension between Daniels, the community, and Judge Ellis simmered, each side waiting for the next move, unsure whether it would lead to understanding or another battle. The community was buzzing with tension as Daniels continued to show up in places he never had before. He listened quietly at church meetings, stood at the back during neighborhood events, and even struck up conversations with people who once avoided his gaze. But trust was a fragile thing, and years of damage weren't so easily undone. Some saw his presence as an attempt at redemption, while others believed it was just another act to save face. Judge Ellis, too, watched from a distance, torn between skepticism and hope. He had seen change before, but never from someone like Daniels. The officer's reputation wasn't just a shadow, it was a storm cloud that hung over the entire town. Still, Ellis knew that change, if real, often came from the most unexpected places. Then came the moment no one could ignore. A high-profile case shook the town, one involving a young Black man facing charges that many believed were rooted in prejudice. The evidence was thin, the stakes were high, and the community was outraged. All eyes turned to Daniels, who now stood at a crossroads. Would he fall back into old patterns, siding with a system many saw as broken? Or would he risk everything to prove he had truly changed? The courtroom was packed as the trial began. Daniels was called to testify, and as he took the stand, the room fell silent. Every word, every gesture carried the weight of the past and the hope for something better. Daniels sat on the witness stand, his uniform crisp, but his expression heavy. The prosecutor's questions were routine, designed to paint the young man as a threat. Daniels answered carefully, sticking to the facts. But when the defense attorney took the floor, the energy in the room shifted. "Officer Daniels," the lawyer began, "isn't it true that your report omitted key details from the scene?" The question hit like a hammer, and a murmur swept through the crowd. Daniels hesitated, his jaw tightening. Judge Ellis, seated at the bench, leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. The lawyer pressed on, revealing inconsistencies in Daniels' report that suggested something deeper at play. As the evidence unfolded, it became clear that someone within the department had altered key details to strengthen the case against the young man. Daniels wasn't just a witness anymore. He was now tied to a system that had gone too far. But then, in an unexpected move, Daniels broke the tension. "I didn't write that part of the report," he said, his voice firm but calm. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as he went on to explain how he had noticed changes in his notes but had been too afraid to speak up. The admission was bold, but it placed him in a dangerous position. Judge Ellis locked eyes with Daniels, seeing the weight of his words. The courtroom was electric, every person on edge as they waited to see if this revelation would unravel the case, or something much larger. The courtroom was a storm of whispers and shocked faces. Daniels' confession had shifted the entire trial, and now the focus wasn't just on the young man's case, it was on the integrity of the police department itself. Judge Ellis called for order, his gavel striking like thunder. "Officer Daniels," he said firmly, "if what you're saying is true, you understand the gravity of your words." Daniels nodded, his face pale but resolute. "I do, Your Honor. I've spent years looking the other way, but I can't anymore." He went on to reveal more about the pressures within the department, the unspoken rules, the expectation to protect their own at any cost. His testimony was damning, and it was clear this trial was no longer just about one young man. It was about a system built on silence and fear. As the defense attorney built on Daniels' revelations, it became clear the charges against the young man wouldn't hold. But just as the courtroom seemed ready to exhale, another twist emerged. An anonymous letter was brought to Judge Ellis, exposing a senior officer's role in orchestrating false evidence, not only in this case, but in several others. The courtroom froze as Ellis read the contents aloud, his voice steady but his expression grim. The young man was acquitted, and the courtroom erupted in a mix of cheers and tears. But the final twist was what happened after the trial. Daniels, now seen as both a whistleblower and a traitor within his own ranks, faced an uncertain future. Yet, instead of stepping back, he chose to stand taller. Partnering with Judge Ellis and leaders in the Black community, he launched a new initiative aimed at reforming the department from within, a step toward justice in a town that desperately needed it. The story didn't end with complete resolution, but it left the town with something it hadn't had in years: hope for real change. Daniels had become more than an officer. He was a voice for justice, proving that even those with a dark past could fight for a brighter future. In the months that followed, the town began to change. Daniels' decision to speak out sparked a ripple effect, encouraging others within the police department to come forward with their own stories. Judge Ellis, now more respected than ever, continued to hold his courtroom to the highest standard, ensuring accountability at every turn. The young man, once at the center of the trial, became an advocate for others who had been wrongfully accused, determined to prevent anyone else from experiencing what he had endured. Daniels faced resistance, but he stayed committed to the path he had chosen. He attended community meetings not as an enforcer, but as a listener, learning from those whose trust he was working to rebuild. His transformation wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it inspired others to believe change was possible. This wasn't just a story of redemption. It was a reminder that courage, even in the face of fear, can light the way to justice.